Alright, this is my second video on the 1940s, and maybe it kind of goes to the 1950s. I call this the three C's. And the three C's are culture, what's going on in society, conformity, which we'll get that one, and consumerism. That's what the 1940s is all about, guys, and kind of what our society is built on today. First off, people began to move back into the suburbs again, like they did in the 1920s. Why? They wanted to commute to the inner cities, but they kind of wanted to be away from the hustle and the bustle and the crime and ebb and flow that goes with urban population, goes with cities. Some people are made to live in cities, other people are not. Now, a model stereotypical community was a place in New York called Levittown. Now, Levittown gave you 4 options for you to build your home. You picked it, and they built it. We're going to call these cookie cutter houses. Kind of, you cookie cutter, you punch the dough, and it comes out in the same shape, right? So these are mass-produced, quickly built houses to get people in the market and to let them start their own home. Now there is a down draw on that, and that you have what is called, we now have 0 lot lines. You don't have much property now. In places like this, you can almost spit on your neighbor if you wanted to. Some people actually share fences as well. And that's kind of interesting in itself. We have our last big migratory pattern in this country. We've already talked about, the people moving west and manifest destiny. We've already talked about the Great Migration, and this is the one we're currently in, we are continuing to see, and that is these old industrial centers that we talked about everybody moving to are now called the Rust Belt, because all these companies and people following the jobs are moving to the Sun Belt. You live in the Sun Belt. Sun Belt is an area of the southern United States that stretches from Florida to California, and there's tons of available land to build all these massive factories and businesses, and people are always going to follow where there are jobs, and so people begin to continue to move down here to the Sun Belt. Okay. Now, this is kind of 1950s, but kind of 1940s as well. The cars come back. Remember, you don't really hear much about the 40s, but definitely in the 50s, there were some big cars. President and former General Eisenhower, concerned about the communistic threat in this country, and we'll get that in the 1950s, will kind of push through Congress what is called the Eisenhower Highway System. These are the highways we have today. They interconnect us, and purpose was twofold. Yes, it was to let people go across the country easier, but the biggest reason was, in case of a communist threat, we can now get to any part of the country relatively quickly. And if you've ever seen on the side of the road, you'll actually see a plane on the interstate. For every mile of curved road, there has to be 2 miles straight road, and that's so a plane, if necessary, could land. You would receive some type of notification via the radio that a plane needed to land, etc. Let's hope we never have to use that, but we are prepared in case it does happen. Kind of cool, though, right? Now, our second C here is conformity. Men and also women and children and everything begin to conform into what was expected of them. Okay, men cut their hair a certain way. They did all these things, as well as women and all these. They're going to conform. They're going to become like one. Now, everyone in our society today would go, I'm not a conformist. And that's a bunch of baloney. Everyone in this country, and everyone your age, and my age as well, we're copying somebody. I mean, this is who we are. It's what we do. Now, the last C is consumerism, and a phrase was, keep up with the Joneses. That basically meant if your neighbor, the Joneses, bought a house, you buy a house. If they bought a new car, you buy a new car. If Miss Jones got a washing machine, you get a washing machine. If they got a new lawnmower, you get a lawnmower. I can keep going. Okay? Consumerism is buying, but it's buying products not for the sake of need, but for the sake of want, to fit into society, to be part of conformity, all these things we had, right? So that is our consumerism idea. Now, kind of some conformity and things that kind of happened there, okay? Well, first we have James Bond, okay? And James Bond was a spy, and so the spy culture was heavy. You had so many shows in the 1950s and 60s and 70s, Get Smart, and Mission Impossible, and James Bond, and Dr. Strangelove, where spying became cool. Whereas also on TV, you had stuff like I Love Lucy, and Father Knows Best, and all these other things that were meant to conform to, okay? Now, the last part we need to talk about here are the unions, and this one here. And generally in times when we have affluence and we have money, unions are frowned upon. So Congress passes the Taft-Hartley Act. Unions refer to this as the slave labor law, and it actually kind of took away some of the collective bargaining powers of unions, made it a little more difficult for unions to exist, and so ultimately it's also referred to as the perfect crime. Now the last one here are just some famous artists. The first is Jackson Pollock. Jackson Pollock is the one that does the splatter art, and a lot of people go, that looks like scribble scrabble, etc., but it actually was considered art. We have Andy Warhol, who famously had the Campbell Soup's can, the multi-picture of Marilyn Monroe. He's our first pop artist, meaning everyone just kind of wanted to be around his art. And the last one here is Roy Lichtenstein. Now, Roy Lichtenstein gave us kind of these massive, just kind of pop art. He also used the Batman-esque kind of words of bam and pow, and kind of popped out. However, these paintings are highly valuable today, and kind of became part of the culture of the 1940s. It's about ostentationism. It's about standing out, while at the same time fitting in to keep up with everybody else. So that's our second video on the 1940s. The last one's going to deal with civil rights in the 1940s.